Welcome back at the Piral video tutorial series. In this tutorial, we'll have a look at how the converters work in Piral. We start at the pilot that we already developed in the previous tutorials. What we can always see is that all the APIs that take components, like for instance the register page API, have two ways of calling them. One way is using a standard React component. Another way is using the so-called foreign interface. The foreign interface refers to general components that are just mounted directly via the DOM. Let's register a page called sample, and let's use this foreign interface. Now, looking at the signature, we see that it's either a React component or an HTML component. And the HTML component needs this type and then a foreign component as a component prop. So what we could do is, we could just give it this type HTML. And now we get the nice completion that we have now a component to be inserted here. So how does this component look like? This function determines what happens when the component is mounted. Then we have two optional ones, unmount and update. Unmount is called when the component is unmounted, and update is called when the inserted props changed. Let's just implement the mount. So that's about it. We could of course here do more manipulation. Looking at the page, we see hello world is being printed. Nice. So that describes this. Of course, we could make a very simple helper. Let's call it from HTML. And that's about it. So what we can now write is from HTML. We have just element. And essentially this code here. Great. And now we want to conclude this here. And this seems to work. Let's have a different text here. Hello world. Oh. And here is the new text. We may want other options too, like for instance the update, etc. So what we could of course envision is that we don't have the callback here, but we call this component. And that's about it. Great. Now this of course works again as before. And we see the text being printed. Now going on from there, what does it have to do with the converters? Well, first of all the converters pretty much just use this interface. All they do is that they mount the existing components then on the DOM. Now these components are then not React components, but they may be Vue components or Angular components, but it's still the same principle. Now what I want to show you is that using these principles we can do something like show in snippet of plain HTML like this one here, React components and fully functional React components. Like for instance, we have our extension foo and we want to include it here. So what we could do is we introduce here a new component that we append. So element query selector. Let's say we want to append it in here, and we call this, we give this maybe an ID. Let's call this the container. Let's put it in the container, and then we need some options. At least we need to have the name, which is foo. Alright, let's just do this, and here we have the I'm the foo extension, and now this is coming from React, and that's quite important. So if we look at this code here, that's our React code for the for the full extension. So it's coming from this lazy loaded module. Let's format this nicely, and now let's see. All right. So here we got this piece, and we can just increase it, and it's a fully working React component displayed in an HTML part that we defined. Now we already got some pre-made converters, and they all work the same. Instead of just, you know, having the plain HTML or vanilla DOM lifecycle, you have then something more special, and they are all called from something, like from Vue, from Angular, etc. And all you need to do is install them in your app shell to make them available for all the pilots. There are also ways of creating them, but that should give you an idea how the converters look like.